Today is March 6th. I'm Joe Reingold, and I'm here interviewing Zelene Lovitt. Good afternoon, Zelene.
Good afternoon, Joe. It's good to see you.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here. Tell us about your family, whatever you have, whatever recollections you have of your grandparents, your parents, where they lived, where they were from, what they did for a living, etc.
I was very lucky because I had all of my grandparents passed when I got married. They all walked down the aisle. So that was really special. My maternal grandparents were Max and Ray Cowish. She was an LVN. He was a dentist. He ultimately left dentistry and became a big shot with the IRS, which was an interesting life. She was very involved in politics. She was elected to be an alternate at the Democratic National Convention in '68 in Chicago. But they had an office, a dental office, in the, I want to say house, because that's the jargon we use, but it was an apartment. And I was able to go into the office and play with the chair going up and down, and I did some terrible things that they didn't know about with their supplies that my children know about. My paternal grandparents were not as sophisticated, but Yetta and Joe Wasserman were my grandparents. He was a carpenter. She was a stay-at-home housewife. She was a phenomenal cook and a wonderful baker, and had a great, great heart. She was just a lovely, lovely woman. My mother was the elder of two children. They lived in the foothills of the Catskills until my mother got polio. She was 9, and that influenced her for the rest of her life and her children as well. My father was the second of 3 boys, and his older brother was a blue baby and died before he was bar mitzvahed. And that was very sad. But my parents got married in '41, and they got married, well, my grandparents got married twice, because my grandfather had to study for the dental exams, and he was worried about my grandmother finding somebody else. So they got married secretly, and her mother never knew. My parents got married twice because in 1941 because of the war, and he wanted to register as a married man. So they got married in May, and their parents did know, but nobody else did. And then they had their big wedding in November. Bob and I happened to have gotten married twice as well.
It's a trend, right?
It was a trend.
Oh boy.
Because the big wedding was planned for September, and we had to get through a summer. And in those days, girls and guys were shyer than they are today. And I wanted to wear a white dress. So we went and stood before a judge, and his parents were there, and my parents were there, and my mother-in-law didn't want to come because she was sure if we were getting married 2 months before we're supposed to get married, there was a reason. And she counted the months for years until we had our first child. That's just the way it was.
Where did you grow up?
In the Bronx, in New York.
Okay.
In an apartment building. And I would go out with my jacks and play on the stoop. And I would do it frontsies, and I would do it backsies. I would, and for those of you who don't know what that is, you can always ask. I played pickup sticks. I had roller skates where you had a key and you'd attach them to the bottom of your shoes. I walked to school, walked back for lunch, walked back afterwards, and came back at the end of the day. People didn't eat lunch at school. I don't think it was provided, and you always felt sorry for those people because they couldn't go home for lunch. I will tell you, my mother was a terrible, terrible cook. She was horrible. She had other attributes, but cooking was not one of them. And when she would go out of the kitchen, I would throw food out the window because it was really, really bad.
Oh, boy.
But that's okay. My sisters and I learned how to cook.
What other kind of fun activities did you do during school, elementary school into high school?
Well, in 4th grade, the children in the city were given an evaluation so that some children in some schools would participate in a program, a trial program in music. And I qualified, and I learned to play the violin. So I did that. I loved music. I learned to read early, and I read Honey Bunch, I read Nancy Drew, I read Cherry Ames. I did not read the Hardy Boys. I knew about Dick and Jane and Spot. So I did a lot of that. Then in high school, I became involved in dramatics, and I was in the plays. I was in Cap and Bells, which was the dramatic club, and I was in a lot of plays, and I typically had the lead. In 2nd grade, I was Cinderella in the school play, and I had this yellow dress, and my cousin Sandy Mae's golden necklace, which I still have. And I guess I just had the bug forever. I've never been shy about being in front of groups.
Was your family involved in any Jewish activities at all, or civic activities?
Well, my grandmother, of
Well,
course,
you said,
was involved in politics, and I was at the polls when I was 3. And I remember being there. For Pesach, first night we went to one set of grandparents, second night we went to the other, and we lit Hanukkah candles. That was the extent of my nuclear family being involved with Jewish things. But then when I was 11, my second sister was born, and we were in a 1-bedroom apartment. So we moved to the suburbs. My father was a CPA, and a client died, and he was the executor, and he got $3,000, which was plenty of money in the 50s.
Those days, yeah.
And so we moved to Spring Valley, and the social life revolved around the synagogue. And so my parents got involved in that. I had a crash bat mitzvah, 1 year of study for that, and then I stayed in classes at the shul until I graduated high school, and the rabbi was a wonderful man, and I stayed in touch with him until he died, which was many, many years later.
A bat mitzvah was not that common back then, was it?
No.
I mean, for you to have one that was not common.
No, and services were on Friday nights. A boy had a bar mitzvah on Saturday. They would have services on Saturday for a boy, but not for a girl. And there were 3 of us. We shared the simcha. There was Carol, there was me, and there was Alice. And this is funny. I have an unusual name, and the head of the synagogue or the men's club must have really practiced to say my name, because he came and he gave us each a Bible, and I was in the middle. So Alice was over here and Carol was over here, and he gave the Bible to Alice. He gave Mazel Tov Alice, and he gave one to Carol, Mazel Tov Carol, and he knew exactly who I was, and he said, Mazel Tov Zelda. So that was very memorable for me. I was very, very involved in the youth group.
So tell us a little bit about your high school years, what you were involved in, besides drama, anything else, and also beyond that, what did you do after high school?
Well, I was in National Honor Society. I was involved in different things. After lunch, we would go into the gym and dance, and I was always dancing. Then I went to Syracuse for my freshman year. My mother was very distraught that her daughter left the nest. So I went to NYU for my second year. What was interesting was that in the summer I was always working, and I worked in, and we lived in a bedroom community. Mm-hmm. And I worked in the hotel, Singer's Hotel, in the office, and that's where Bob and I connected.
Okay.
And
was he working in the hotel also?
Yeah, he was a waiter, and I was the office lady, girl, because I was young. I was still a teenager when we got married.
Oh.
And yes, we're married 60 years already, which is amazing. Because I think if you get married early, you're not really formed, and you can grow this way, or you can grow this way, and I grew this way.
Right.
And we got married after my sophomore year and moved down to LSU, where I completed my college years. And if you want to know what I did in college,
sure.
I learned to be a wife. Times were very different then, and I was very naive and had to take our laundry to a laundromat. And so I would bundle it up, and this was the first time when I went across the street and down the block, and I went to open the door, and it said, whites only. And I reacted. I said, what am I supposed to do with my colored clothes? Because I had no
idea.
This was not part of how I grew up. Sonny Gale was the man who cleaned the house. He was invited to my wedding. There was no prejudice and caste attitude. And I figured it out rather quickly that it meant only white people were allowed in there. It was a very different time and very disturbing, and I've been involved as an adult in civil rights. I've marched, I've donated money, I've protested outside my senators because there are civic things that have value to me. And it's not enough to have those values if you don't act. And so I've been involved. In fact, I was on the Dallas Senior Affairs Commission for a few years and had to give that up when I moved to the Legacy because I was in a different district.
Right.
But I've always been involved in those kinds of things that have to do with ethics. And I've been a volunteer my whole life. And in fact, going back to high school, I went with my youth group to Rockland State Hospital to spend time with young people who were kept there. They either had problems or their families had problems. So even in high school, I was involved in civic activities. And then after I graduated from college and Bob was still working on his PhD, I worked in preschools in Baton Rouge. When we ultimately moved to Dallas, I got involved with synagogues and Jewish organizations.
When did you come here?
Well, I graduated in '65, and that year Bob had his internship, so we moved here. My daughter was born here. Then we moved back to Baton Rouge where he finished his dissertation. And then we moved here permanently, '66, '67. And we've been here ever since.
What type of employment did Bob have when he first moved here, when he moved back here?
He was a PhD psychologist. He spent a year at the Child Guidance Center and then was quickly snatched up by UT Southwestern. And he ultimately, he was on the faculty, and he ultimately became the chief psychologist at Parkland.
Oh, very good.
And there was a time when just about every psychologist in the city had studied under him, and many of the psychiatrists had as well. Mm-hmm. And he retired from there after like 38 years.
So what did you do to busy yourself? Maybe busy isn't the right word. What did you get involved in when you moved the second time back here? You said synagogue life. And where did that lead you?
Well, the prime thing was being a wife and mother. Mm. And I have 3 children. My oldest is Avra. My middle child is Stephen, and my baby is Benjamin. And I spent a lot of time being a mother. And I loved it. In fact, between Stephen and Benjamin, we were foster parents for Jewish Family Service and took newborns until all the documentation could be handled, and then the children were placed with their parents. And then Benjamin was born. Yeah. But I started working at Sherith in their preschool. Before it was Solomon Schechter, before it was Levine Academy. And then I moved over to Akiba for a while, and I met wonderful people at these schools. That's what made everything worthwhile. Of course, the children, but the people. And then I came back to Solomon Schechter, and I was involved in a program that I developed called Reading Friends, and it was awarded the National Council of Teachers of Reading a site of excellence nationally. Only 50 were so designated, and I think we were the only one in Texas. Mm-hmm.
I remember that program well. I sure do.
Yeah. And I left after a few years and went to the Carrollton Farmers Branch school system as a first grade teacher. Then I became a 4th grade teacher. Then I became a reading specialist. Mm-hmm. I was a reading recovery teacher. I mentored teachers. And then I became the at-risk coordinator for the district, and then I became the administrator for summer school. I shared that with someone else, he took care of HR and I took care of the budget. And we had 8,000 kids in summer school. So you can imagine that was a big, big job. I have always been a writer, and I have 10 publications to my name. Not just little bitty things, but national journals, which makes me very proud.
Absolutely.
I was the president of the North Texas Reading Association. I think it was in '87 that the Texas State Reading Association gave me the Teacher of the Year honor. I've been involved in a lot of things. When I retired from the school district, I was there for 28 years. I consulted with the Texas Education Association and visited and helped campuses that didn't meet expectations so that they could ultimately do that. And all of that was exciting. I got involved with Council of Jewish Women, and I was president of Evening Branch for a year. We got involved with Congregation Beth Torah, and I was the first woman president of that congregation. And I'm still involved. I've held most leadership positions, including treasurer, God help me. I was very lucky that Neil Zatmary broke me in, and he was a tough guy many, many years ago. And I like people. I am a grandmother of 4.
Do they live here? Where are your 3 children now?
Well, Avra lives in Little Elm, which is less than an hour away.
Right.
Stephen moved last year to Allentown, Pennsylvania. He had spent his life in Houston. But when his last child graduated high school, he felt he could leave, and he did. And my baby Benjamin, who's going to be 50 next year, made Aliyah 17 years ago. He is a stand-up comic and an educator and an author, and the book that he and a friend co-authored this year won the National Award for the National Jewish Book Council in one of their categories. And I'm very proud of that. But I'm proud of all my children.
Yes, yeah.
And
Very good.
ask me something else.
I will. If you had to think back on your life and your wonderful career and all the things you've done, is there anybody that stands out that you would say was your mentor along the way?
I'm going to give you an answer that has nothing to do with career. I think,
That's okay.
I'm not sure the word is mentor, but my mother-in-law was such an example to me. She was an uneducated, illiterate woman, very unsophisticated, but she was amazing. She had friends that lasted her whole life. She kept a house. The family lived in a very modest way. She was a wonderful cook. She was a loving parent, completely unsophisticated, completely uneducated. She lived through the horrors of World War I. Her mother died when she was 14. She had 2 younger siblings. She took care of them. After the war, she brought them across Europe. Her father had already come to the States, and she lived through horrors. But she survived, and she did it with a good heart. That's who I've wanted to be.
Wonderful. That's beautiful. So then here's another one. This might be tougher, I don't know. With all of your fabulous achievements and accolades, is there anything you can pick that you could say you were the most proud of?
My children.
Yeah, okay.
My children.
Yeah.
Each of them is a good person. What am I proud of? I'm proud, professionally, and in terms of volunteers, that I know so many people, and I get so excited when I see somebody who I haven't seen for a million years, who's grown up, and I can't believe that's the same little, little pisher who I knew and taught, or
And now they have their PhD, right?
or their mothers who who come over and they hug me and they tell me stories about their kids, or I don't know if it's proud, but it gives me such satisfaction to have these connections and these memories.
Yeah. I certainly understand that. So the last thing I want to ask you, and you're welcome to add anything else you want, I love to hear from people who are not natives here, but have been here a while. What do you recall? What was Dallas like when you first came here, and what do you see as the changes nowadays? And I know besides the fact that the city's gotten huge, I realize that, but what else have you really seen since you've been here?
Well, when I came here, there were maybe 5 shuls. There wasn't that much. And most of them were pretty established. Today, there's a shul no matter where you look. And every one of them is wonderful. They may not be for me, but they are for somebody. And I'm happy about that. I drive around and I still know where I am, even when I get lost, because I'm not really lost. But, I got here before LBJ opened up. The traffic lights were where there weren't even streets. The city has changed. I see a lot of faces that I wouldn't have seen before, all colors and languages. I wish I had the facility in other languages that these people have. I am still learning. I'm not learning languages, but I'm learning. I'm one of the founding editors of the newly established resident newsletter. And 2.5 weeks ago, I didn't know how to do Word, and I formatted that and edited it and put it out in less than 2 weeks. I have the second edition ready to be printed. I'm learning. I have to keep growing. The city is growing. The city has challenges.
What do you think about being here at the
At
Legacy?
the Legacy?
Yeah, how did you decide to come here?
I resisted leaving the house. We were there 48 years. But life changes, and people have to recognize the need to change as well. And it was pointed out to us by a doctor on a Thursday that it was time. And Friday I was here. Monday we took a tour. That Friday, count 4 weeks, we moved in. This was the only place I wanted to go. It's very easy to live here. Are there adjustments? Of course there are. But this is a quality place, again, because of the people. There are two cultures here. There are the residents and there's the staff. And they are both good,
Right.
really good. So, do I wish I weren't here? Yeah, I wish I was 30 years old again. I wish I was the powerhouse that I'd look back and say, I can do this. Well, I'm still saying I can do this. But I have to make adjustments. And it's not the fault of this place that I got old. But I'm not. I just have a bunch of years.
That's right.
So yes, I do like it here, and I have to keep growing, and I have to change as the challenges dictate.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful.
And I'm so
And
glad
keep
you
on
helped
growing.
me.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.